Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Online.
Definitely at that point in the next 30 minutes of recording was when the microphone decided that it wasn't going to play, and I didn't discover that until I started to edit the video to put it in place. So what I'm going to do is speed up this section where I was doing the introduction to the design that was gifted to me so that we could talk about European influence designs, and just do the voiceover so that you can understand what I was talking about in the video. We'll have a look at our DesignEye analysis, and then fortunately during the recreation of two individual European influence designs, the microphone comes back on, so you'll hear me talking live to the designs towards the end of the video. So bear with me, I am sorry that technical issues got the better of me on this occasion, but I'm sure there'll still be educational value for you in the video. So what we have here is a design that was entered in a competition during the week. It has travelled quite a bit, so some of the plant material, the roses particularly, are looking a little bit tired. It was entered in a competition where it was a European influence design theme, and European influence designs is a defined design style in this country. So I will talk a little bit about in the next section what that definition is, but it means that, basically means that it can either be parallel or a radial design, and on this occasion they were more inclined to think that the radial designs were the designs that they were looking for. This is very much a parallel design, and so it was not considered in the same breath as the designs that were there that were radial designs. Something that wasn't known to the competitor before she took this design to the competition. I do appreciate that she allowed me to deconstruct it and reconstruct it again, and I hope that she gets some value out of it in terms of learning what my interpretation would be of the European influence designs. So we have here a long container, and very much the parallel placements of the plant material, a good combination of fresh and dried materials in that some of the elements are drying off, not so much dried plant material. There's a few embellishments there, not too many to overstep the mark. It's a good design in a parallel sense because it does have clear groupings of plant material. With a European influence design, we would also be looking at other European techniques, so sheltering or shading or cushioning groupings in the way that these ones are done here. And it's the use of unusual plant materials as well, so incorporating the cactus and succulents and the orchid with the roots attached, so the whole of the plant rather than just the flowers or just the foliage. And so there are elements within the design that fall into the category of a European influence design, but in terms of this competition they were looking for something a little bit more specifically radially based, which means that there is one point of emergence from the container. So what I'm going to do is take it apart and in two different containers show you how it could be incorporated into a European influence design with a radial base. And as the judge on the day said to the competitor, there are sections of it that fall within the right categories, but as a whole it presents as a parallel design. So let's have a look now at what the analysis says about the design in terms of it being a European influence design, and then we'll go and have a look at the deconstruction, reconstruction efforts that I made. Now let's look at the definition and the analysis of this design in terms of that definition. So the design style context is European influence design. European floral design is known for strong structure and form, asymmetrical balance, grouping and repetition, defined focal areas, clear use of negative space, often linear or parallel style emphasis. So obviously, as we talked about before, this has a parallel style emphasis, but the judging on the day, they were looking for radial. So whilst the radial can still be linear, naturally enough, but radial means one point of emergence from the container. So you can see with this design, as I mentioned earlier, that there are sections of it that would be radially acceptable, but not as a whole presentation. So the other thing to remember in terms of European influence design is that it was really introduced to floral design and floral art in the 1980s and 1990s. So we're going back a little bit now, but a lot of it is about the techniques that we use, because we still use the techniques today, the bundling, the sheltering and shading and groupings and the cushioning and a whole lot of others that are not coming to mind at the moment, but you will be able to find them in terms of design quite clearly listed in a lot of the schedules that require this type of design style. So if we look individually at the principles and elements of design in terms of this type of design, we're looking at line first of all. The strengths of this particular presented design, the vertical lines created by the lily stems, cactus and roses give good height and structural strength. Now the opportunities for improvement: the left-hand branch extends outward but lacks a rhythmic connection with the upright lines. It could be repositioned or echoed on the right to improve flow. So unfortunately, I think that had the orchid that is on the right been stable in its placement, it was quite bottom heavy, it would have mirrored that or reflected that curve. So there would have been a little bit more framing, which again is a European technique, to make this a little bit more obviously influenced by the European designers. So that's an interesting observation, that just that one little change would have enhanced the design overall in terms of line, which, as we heard, is one of the most important things in European influence design. We look at form and space. The strengths are that each botanical material has its own form, well defined, allowing for visual clarity. So we can see very clearly the space in between them. We can see the branches, we can see the cactus, we can see the lilies, we can see the roses, we can see the orchid, and we can see those basing placements down the bottom, the chrysanthemum, the rose and the apple, and then the button chrysanthemums underneath it. So all very clearly identifiable. It's not a massive floral material. The opportunities here is there is some crowding in the base area. More negative space between grouped elements would enhance the airy architectural quality typical of European design. So it's about that, the lines and the form and the negative space. So there's not a whole lot of negative space in this design. There is space between the placements, but it doesn't really form negative space because it's not cohesive enough in terms of its overall look. And as it says, the base area is quite densely crowded. Colour. So the strength in the colour, the red, coral and green palette is bold and modern. Excellent use of analogous colours, the coral, pink and red. So that's the good choices in terms of those colour combinations and of keeping the colours, even though they're different bits of plant material, keeping them in that palette. The opportunities here, the bright green basing area is somewhat dominant and can feel disconnected unless echoed or harmonised elsewhere. The base is actually covering the oasis that's within that area there. So it probably would have benefited more from something that was a bit more within the colour palette and a bit more earthy feel to it. So something that reflected the roots from the orchids, so perhaps some tillandsia or some coconut fibre or some bark chips, just something that was a little bit more in keeping with the remainder of the design would have helped there. Texture, varied textures, smooth roses, spiky cactus, soft fruits, woody branch, add interest and contrast. So it's good that there's contrast in the textures as well as interest. The opportunities for textures are currently somewhat isolated. More intentional repetition or bridging textures, for example mid-scale foliage, would help unify. Now, I don't know so much about the mid-scale foliage, but I think the more intentional repetition or bridging of the textures would work as well. So perhaps it's something that we can look at when I redo the design into the two individual designs, that we look more at how the textures are, how we transition from one texture to another, whereas here, because of the placements being so parallel, the textures are very defined in those areas where the placements are. Balance. The strength is the weight distribution is generally good, with visual weight on both sides, and you can see that in terms of the placements. The opportunities here, the left branch adds tension and asymmetry, but its scale makes it feel top heavy and visually detached from the rest of the design. So I think had the orchid on the other side been a little bit more reflective of the curve, it wouldn't have looked so out of balance, and I think that's where it's lacking at the moment. I would also like to have seen the roses just slightly lower than they are in this, but that's my personal visual balance approach. The focal area. The central cluster of roses, cactus and the apple offers a point of convergence. So that's our radial section there, is that area where it looks like everything's coming from the one point. So the cactus, the rose, the chrysanthemum and the apple just feel like they're all in that one area there. The opportunities here clarify the true focal area. Right now it competes with the bright red lilies. One stronger dominant group, possibly lower or central, would provide more cohesion. So the dominance here is happening because of the colour of the lilies, but because we've got the red rose there, we get drawn back to that grouping there that the rose is included with. And so there is a little bit of competition between those areas to see where we should be looking first. So that definitely is something that we could look at again in terms of this design. So rhythm and movement, now our last one. The strength are good vertical repetition, directional pulls from both bottom to top. And the opportunities, the left and right extremities feel disconnected. A more fluid sweeping movement through the centre would strengthen the rhythm. So had the, once again I'll say it, had the orchid been a little bit more curved, we would have continued that line from the branches down through the base and up the other side. And so that sweeping movement would have come through the centre because we would be looking to follow through to the other side. So that's a good suggestion. Let's now have a look at deconstructing this particular design as it stands now and putting it into two individual European influence designs that are very much in the radial placement side of things. So here we have our original design and the two designs that I made using some material from the original design. The two new designs are radial in their outlook and are European influenced by some of the techniques that are incorporated into those designs, which I'll talk about as we go through the designs. I'm still without a microphone in the original video, so I will talk through what I'm doing. This first part, I'm just talking about the two containers that I'm using. So one is a pottery top of an ikebana style tall vase, and the other is one of the very standard glossy black pots. They've both got Oasis in them. The option to use something other than Oasis if you wanted to be sustainable is certainly there, and you could use the wire cages that we made in a separate video, and I'll put the link to that in the description below. But I used the Oasis because it was in the original design, and so it's repurposing that bit of Oasis for something else for the time being. The ceramic vase was gifted to me by a mutual friend of the person who did the original arrangement, so I chose that particularly for us to have that connection back to our friend who helped us both on our floral art journeys. we see the first design using that ceramic container. I've given you the images from the front, or from two angles, just to give you an idea of the fact that sometimes these designs can be placed either way on the bench. So in the first image with the rose at the back, it still gives you the idea of a radial design, but you might lose a little bit of marks because the branch doesn't appear to come exactly from the center where the rest of the plant material is coming from. And that's because the medium that I used to cover the oasis, which was a flattened bird's nest, is covering up the fact that that branch actually continues on. So what I would need to do is put the material that is covering the oasis underneath the branch and still on top of the oasis, so that you could see that the branch actually continues down to where the lilies emerge from the container. With the other image, because the roses at the front, it just appears as though they're all coming out of that one place. So this is radial placement. They all appear to be emerging from the same place in the container. And so now let me give you a quick overview of how it came together. Firstly, I looked at the container itself. Now I'm using the branch, two branches. There was a longer branch, but I didn't want to cut it. So I've used two, and the longer branch would have been out of scale with the container itself. The lilies, some fern to do some shading rather than sheltering, and I'll talk about the difference between those two. The covering for the oasis and the single rose that was in the original design. So I generally would place the branch first because it is the longest line within the design. So I need to make sure that that's in place so that I can get all of the other placements in the right spots. I wasted a little bit of time initially trying to get the covering for the oasis right, but in the end I decided to put that aside and do it after I had put the rest of the material in. Usually we say to put the basing material in first so that you know that your oasis is covered, but in this case the basing material was quite dense and I felt that I could add it afterwards without too much difficulty. So I put the branch in and got that line that I wanted, or the two branches in and got the line that I wanted. And then I added the lilies, and that gave me, still using that single point of emergence, it gives me the straighter line, gives me that negative space between the lilies and the branch. And then just made sure that the second of the lilies wasn't going to be too dominant. You have to look at scale and proportion, particularly with big plant material like lilies, to make sure that you're not visually overbalancing your design in some way. And then placing the rose right at the front, down low, gave me that focal area, whether it was at the back or the front. At that point didn't matter. So then I went on to talk about the placement of the ferns, because one of the European influence techniques is sheltering and the other is shading. So sheltering is where you have plant material that underneath which other plant material shelters, for want of the explanation. So something like a Xanadu leaf that comes out, so it forms a canopy almost, so that you can then put your other plant material underneath it. With shading or shadowing, it is simply that. It is that the placement of the main piece of plant material is reflected in a shadow of it underneath. And so that's what I did with this one. I had a larger piece of fern that I turned the opposite way to the way we would normally place it, because I wanted the curve that it had to bring you back into the design and to somehow, like we talked about in the original design, have that sweep, that circular sweep through the design from one side to the other. So I placed it like that, and then I had underneath a smaller one that was exactly the same shape, form, but much smaller, so it looked like that was the shadow of the one on top. So that's shadowing and sheltering. too many things going through my brain. Sheltering is where your plant material shelters underneath something that is above it. And so it can be the same material, it can be different material. Usually it's different material, so it makes it quite obvious that it's sheltered underneath that canopy of the other plant material. And so once I had those in place, I really didn't want to put anything else in the design. I put in the filler material just to finish off the design itself, but I was happy that that was enough. I didn't need anything more in the design. European influence designs are quite minimal, and so we have to take stuff out, I guess is the best way to put it, rather than keep putting things in. So that's the first design, radial with some European influence techniques in it. Let's now look at the second one. And for part of the second one, there's actually live video with sound. Here we have the second design, and this time I've used the roses, the pink chrysanthemum, some smaller of the button chrysanthemums, and the orchid. And I did try and use the basing material, which you'll see in a minute. But the issue with this one that is a little bit debatable is the container. It's black and it's glossy, and sometimes that can detract from the rest of your design. So having those strong colour palette blended together above the container lessens the impact of the container, but I still would like to see some sort of pink through the container. I only had the black one, so I had to use that one in terms of its shape and size, because I wanted something that was obviously round. I do need something that's a little bit shiny, because there's not a lot of shine in terms of texture for the rest of the design. So you'd have to think, if for a competition, I'd have to think about doing something with the container. Probably still use the black, but I might put a couple of sprays of mottled pink paint over it, or some ribbon, wrap around some ribbon, or some wool or cotton, just to bring the pink and to cut that very dominant area of the black glossy bars. But for the rest of the design, you can see I started to put that together. I used that matting to cover the oasis, and then found that it detracted from the design itself. I really didn't need it because enough of the plant material was going to cover the base. And so I spent some time making sure that the orchid was anchored into the design, so that it would give me at the base of that orchid, where the roots are, that was going to be my point of emergence for the rest of the plant material. And so I started to place things in, and then decided that I'd just have a little bit of a rethink. So the next part of the video is where you'll actually hear the live sound. So let's have a look at that.
So I took a little bit of a break because I wasn't happy with the way the placements were going through that basing material that I used, the mat that I used, and so I've taken that away because I don't really need it at the moment. And what I have discovered in the meantime is that the little pillow effect that Letitia had made, there was actually 3 individual ones, and so I've separated those out, and so I'll see if I can use those within the design just to finish off the basing. So we've got our placements now, focal area, nice line, we've got some negative space, we've got our roses to put in now to give us some additional height in the design, remembering that we've got to look like we're coming from that one point of emergence. So we'll give it some love. We could angle them out that way, but I just don't think it works in terms of the curve, because these are very straight lines. And so we'll bring this one down a little bit further, I think. Minimal material, which is a good thing these days. Now that rose is pointing out simply because it it's got a bit tight. I could have it coming. Let's see if we do it that way. What it does, conveniently, is give us a reflection of that line. So in terms of European influenced techniques in this design, we've got the whole of the plant being used. We're going to use now some of this these pillows to fill in the gaps around the base. Very conveniently placed. I'm doing this backwards. I hope you're impressed. These are just the individual ones, just to fill in a couple of gaps around the back here, which you'll see when I turn it round, because I will need to turn it round just to make sure I'm happy with the way it's going. Yes, I am. And so we put that one around the front. So we've still got that technique of the pillowed effect of the croissants. I was just looking for one with a longer stem, because that's come down a bit further than I expected. But that's okay. Because what it does is emphasise the fact that it is a little pillow of design. So there we have our second repurposed part of the design, showing a little bit more of the European influence and European influenced techniques. We've got nice form in the lines that are there. We've got negative space there. You can see now how this is connected to the rest of the design through the basing and through the fact that it looks like it's radial placement, where we just had the one there. It was just needed something more to finish off the design. We've looked at the height. I wouldn't, with the roses, I wouldn't go much higher than that. It's still below the height of this side of it, but this brings us down. Fortunately, this rose brings us down further into the design. What you could do there, I'm just looking to see if I've got any more of the fern. You could have the fern, there's some. You could have had the fern coming back that way, but I just think it's too much in this design. I don't think it needs it. You could have something else that was, in terms of foliage, something else that was a good line, but brought it lower down, brought it back around, so just almost reflecting what's here. And that shows you this one, and the other one shows you some of the European design influenced techniques that are used in this particular category. It is a defined design style. You will find, as I said earlier, with all definitions, they're open to interpretation. So it's best to talk to the organisers of your competition to make sure that you understand what the judges are going to be looked at in terms of that definition. And if you can't get hold of anyone, put in something that you think is right from the definitions, from the things that are in this video, and then listen to the feedback and make sure that next time you do that particular competition that you understand their interpretation of this particular design style definition. So I shall step away and put both designs here so that you can have a good look at the two designs, and that, I hope, helps you in terms of thinking about European influenced designs. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Online.